Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Well, today we're going to focus on something I know you deal with every single day on those construction and demolition sites. We're talking fire protection.
Yep, you got it. And to get into the nitty-gritty, we're going to be looking at OSHA Standard 1926.150.
Presented by Safety One Source.
Of course.
All right, so I know you safety pros out there, you're probably thinking, oh, I know all about this stuff.
Right.
But trust me, stick with us. Because even if you think you know everything about fire extinguishers, I bet there's a few things in this standard that might surprise you.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the things that stands out to me the most about how OSHA approaches fire protection is it's not just about what happens when there's a fire.
Right.
It's really about having that whole program set up from the very beginning to try to prevent fires in the first place.
Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it starts with the employer. The employer has the responsibility to actually come up with this fire protection program and implement it. And it has to cover every part of the project, from the moment construction starts to when you're doing the final demo.
So it's not just a static document. It's something that needs to be updated as the project changes.
Absolutely.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. Think of it like a roadmap. It's going to guide you through each phase and make sure that everything is in place, so you're doing the right things the right way at the right time.
Makes sense. And I mean, one of the most basic things, right? You got to have water.
Oh, absolutely.
So what does OSHA say about water supply?
Water is like the lifeblood, right? Of firefighting. But OSHA's not messing around. They get very specific about the volume of water that you need, how long you need it to be available, and they even talk about the pressure requirements.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So like in a real world scenario, how does that play out?
Well, let's say you've got a fire that breaks out on one of the upper floors of, let's say, a high-rise. You're building a high-rise building, and you've got a fire way up there. You're going to need to have enough water pressure to be able to reach that height. Right?
Yeah.
And you're going to need to have enough water to fight that fire until the fire department shows up to help you out.
Makes sense. Now, of course, we're going to talk about fire extinguishers.
Of course, yeah.
But I bet there are some things that people maybe don't know about fire extinguishers when it comes to the OSHA standard. What are some of those things that people might miss?
You know, a lot of people don't realize that OSHA's pretty specific about how much square footage each extinguisher needs to cover. So it's not enough to just have them scattered around the job site.
Right.
You have to actually think about placement to make sure you've got adequate coverage everywhere.
So you can't just stick one in the corner and call it a day.
No, not at all. And on top of that, you can't be more than 100 feet away from an extinguisher.
Oh, really?
Yeah, think about it. When there's a fire, every second counts. Right.
You have to be able to get to an extinguisher quickly.
Okay, and so placement's really important, but then are there situations where you need a specific type of extinguisher?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So if you're working with flammable liquids or gases, which is very common on a construction site, you got to have a 10B extinguisher.
Okay.
And it needs to be within 50 feet of any area where you've got more than 5 gallons of flammable liquid or 5 pounds of gas. Because those things, they can go up in flames pretty easily.
Well, yeah, I would think so. Why is that 10B so important for those particular situations?
Well, you know, flammable liquid fires, they're different than your average fire. You use the wrong kind of extinguisher on a flammable liquid, you might actually make the fire worse.
Wow. So it's not just about having one, it's about having the right kind.
Right. Exactly. And then speaking of the right kind, you know, you might think this is a weird question, but do you think those old school extinguishers with the toxic chemicals are still allowed?
I mean, I would hope not, but are they? Actually, OSHA says absolutely not. No carbon tetrachloride extinguishers or anything with toxic vaporizing liquids.
Yeah.
Back in the day, yeah, those were common, but now we know better, right? Those chemicals can be super dangerous to people.
Yeah. So if you find one tucked away in a storage closet somewhere, get rid of it.
Please dispose of it properly and make sure everyone is using the right extinguishers that are up to code.
Okay, so, you know, fire extinguishers, we all have them, and we all know they need to be inspected.
Of course, yep.
But just as a quick reminder, what are the guidelines for making sure that those extinguishers are ready to go?
Well, you got to follow the NFPA 10A guidelines.
And for anybody who doesn't know, NFPA stands for the National Fire Protection Association. And they're the ones who set the standards for keeping those extinguishers in tip-top shape.
Okay, so we talked about extinguishers, but what about fire hoses? Those seem like they would be pretty important, especially on a larger site.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Fire hoses are another crucial piece of the puzzle, and OSHA, of course, they have requirements for those as well. Okay, so let's talk fire hoses. What do we need to know?
Well, here's an interesting thing. You can actually swap out a 2A extinguisher for a 100-foot hose.
Oh, really?
But it has to have a nozzle that can shoot out at least 25 gallons per minute.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it has to be able to reach every spot in that area.
Okay, so there's some flexibility there. But I imagine another important thing is making sure that your hose is going to work with the local fire department.
Absolutely. And OSHA actually specifically requires you to have adapters on hand.
Oh, okay.
Just in case your connections don't match up with what the fire department uses, because when they show up, you've got to be able to work together seamlessly.
It's all about teamwork when it comes to fire safety.
Exactly.
Especially, I would imagine, during demolition when you've got all kinds of combustible materials flying around.
Absolutely. During demolition, you have to have those charged hose lines ready to go.
And those have to be supplied by, like, hydrants.
Yeah, or a water tank truck with pumps or something similar that's going to give you that constant supply of water. Because you can't mess around when you're dealing with that kind of fire risk.
No, definitely not. So let's zoom out a little bit now and talk about some of the bigger, more permanent things you might find on a construction site. Like, what about sprinkler systems and standpipes? What does OSHA say about that kind of stuff?
That's where you really start to see this proactive approach to fire safety. You're trying to build that safety right into the building.
So it's not just about putting the fire out, it's about stopping it from happening in the first place.
Exactly, yeah. So for example, if the building is designed to have sprinklers, you need to install the sprinkler system as you're building. So as each floor is finished, that sprinkler system needs to be up and running as soon as possible.
To minimize the risk if a fire does start.
Exactly. And it's not just for new construction either. If you're renovating or demolishing a building that already has sprinklers, you got to keep those sprinklers working as long as you can.
Yeah, unless it's like impossible to do so because of the work you're doing.
Exactly. And even then, as soon as you can get them back online, you need to do it.
Right. Because it's really about maintaining that protection throughout the whole life of the project.
Absolutely. And even small things can make a big difference. Like, did you know OSHA wants you to check those sprinkler control valves every single day?
Really? Every day?
Yeah, at the end of the workday, you got to make sure those valves are good to go.
I can see how that could get overlooked on a busy site.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you don't want to find out a valve has been accidentally shut off when a fire breaks out. That's the worst time to find out.
So it's a small check, but it could have big consequences. And it's not just about having the equipment. It's about making sure that it's ready to do its job.
Exactly.
But of course, equipment is just one piece of the puzzle. You got to be able to communicate if there is a fire.
Oh, 100%. You can have the best equipment in the world, but if you can't alert people and get them out of the building safely, it's not going to do them much good.
Right. So what about fire alarm systems? What does OSHA say about those?
The big thing is that they have to be able to alert everyone on site and get the message to the fire department.
Okay.
So whether that's a phone system, a siren, whatever it is, it has to work, and it has to work quickly.
And I imagine it's not enough to just have the system. You got to make sure everybody knows how to use it too.
Right. So OSHA really pushes having clear instructions posted everywhere, how to use the alarm, what the different codes mean, and how to report a fire.
So there's no question what to do. And that can make all the difference in an emergency situation.
Absolutely. Minimizing confusion is key. And, we've been talking about a lot of equipment and things, but we can't forget about the building itself.
Right. The physical structure of the building can either help or hurt in a fire.
Absolutely. And that's where fire cutoffs come into play.
Okay, so things like firewalls.
Yeah, firewalls, fire doors, fire-rated stairwells, all those things are super important for slowing down the spread of a fire.
So these are things that need to be built in from the beginning.
Absolutely. And OSHA actually says they need to be prioritized during construction, especially fire doors, because they help contain a fire to one area.
Oh, okay.
So they have to have those automatic closers, and they have to be installed in the openings as soon as possible.
So as you're building, get those things in place. And what about when you're taking a building apart? Do the same principles apply?
Absolutely. Even during demolition, those fire cutoffs have to stay in place as long as possible until it's absolutely necessary to take them out.
So even when you're tearing things down, you still have to be thinking about fire safety.
Absolutely. You just never know when a fire might happen, so you got to be prepared.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here. Water supplies, extinguishers, fire hoses, sprinkler systems, fire cutoffs. It's clear that OSHA takes fire protection very seriously.
Oh, yeah. They have a whole system set up.
And it's really about looking at the entire work environment and all the potential hazards.
Exactly. And making sure you have what you need to stay safe. You know what really stands out to me from the OSHA standard is this idea of having a whole fire protection program.
Oh, yeah.
Like a real plan. It's not just about having a fire extinguisher.
Right.
It's about thinking ahead and having systems in place.
Okay, so let's dig into that a little bit more.
No.
What are some of the things employers need to be thinking about when they're putting this program together?
Well, first things first, you got to do a hazard assessment.
Right.
Figure out what could cause a fire on your site.
Okay.
What materials are flammable,
And that's going to be different on every single job site.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, if you're welding versus doing demo, totally different hazards.
Yeah.
So you really got to think about the specific risks you're dealing with on that particular job.
Okay, so you figured out what your hazards are, then what?
Then you got to come up with ways to control those hazards. So maybe that means having a hot work permit system.
Yeah.
Or making sure you're storing flammable stuff properly.
Right.
Keeping things tidy so you don't have a bunch of combustible debris lying around.
Yeah. It's all about being proactive.
Exactly.
And not just waiting for a fire to start.
Right, you got to prevent it.
But it's one thing to have a plan on paper, right?
Yeah.
You got to make sure people know what to do.
Absolutely. Training is key.
So how does OSHA address that?
OSHA's really clear about that.
Okay.
You have to train your employees on fire safety.
Makes sense.
They need to know what the hazards are, what the procedures are, and how to stay safe.
Right, because you can have the best plan in the world, but if nobody knows how to follow it.
Exactly. It's not going to do much good.
Okay, so let's say despite all our best efforts, a fire does break out.
Right.
What does OSHA say about having an emergency plan?
Oh, they're all over that.
Okay.
You absolutely have to have a plan for how you're going to deal with a fire emergency.
Right.
So things like escape routes, assembly points, making sure everyone knows what to do when the alarm goes off.
So it's not just about putting the fire out, it's about getting everybody out safely.
Exactly. Safety first.
And I bet fire drills are a big part of that.
Oh, yeah. Fire drills are crucial.
Yeah.
That's how you practice your escape plan and figure out if it actually works.
And make sure everyone knows what they're doing.
Right, because when a real fire happens, it's going to be chaotic.
Yeah.
People are going to be stressed out.
Right.
So having practiced ahead of time can make a huge difference.
It becomes almost second nature.
Exactly.
So you don't even have to think about it.
Right. You just know what to do.
And during those drills, you're testing the alarm system too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Making sure everything's working.
Yep. And practicing how to contact the fire department.
Okay, so communication's a big part of it.
Huge part of it.
Okay, now, we've been talking a lot about the employer's responsibility.
Right.
But what about the workers themselves?
Oh, they have a role to play too.
Okay.
OSHA says employees have to follow the procedures and act responsibly to prevent fires.
So it's a team effort.
Exactly. Everyone's got to be on board.
Now, I know we're talking about OSHA here,
Right.
but a lot of places have their own fire codes too.
Yeah, definitely.
So how does that all work together?
That's a great question.
Right.
Because OSHA sets the minimum,
Okay.
but some states or cities might have even stricter rules.
So you got to know your local codes too,
Absolutely.
not just the federal ones.
Right. And honestly, it's always a good idea to go above and beyond the minimum anyway.
Yeah, why not?
Right. These rules are here to protect people.
Yeah.
So why not do everything you can to be safe?
And I think one thing that's easy to forget about in all of this is documentation.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Right.
Documentation is so important.
So what kind of records do you need to be keeping when it comes to fire safety?
Well, pretty much everything.
Okay.
Your hazard assessment, your control procedures,
Yep.
training records, your emergency plan.
And what about like inspections of fire extinguishers and stuff?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Right.
You got to keep track of all of that.
So if it has to do with fire safety, write it down.
Exactly. If OSHA comes knocking, you want to be able to show them you're taking it seriously.
And you've got proof.
Right. Proof that you're doing things the right way.
Okay, well, this has been really helpful.
Good. I'm glad.
I'm feeling a lot more clear on what OSHA expects,
That's what we like to hear.
but I know there's still more to cover.
Oh, yeah. We're just getting started.
So what's coming up in the final part of this deep dive?
In the next part, let's get practical.
Okay.
We'll talk about some tips and resources to help you really make your fire protection program top-notch.
Ooh, I like it.
We'll talk about best practices and how to go above and beyond just the bare minimum.
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. It's going to be good.
All right, so we've talked about what OSHA wants to see in a fire protection program, but now I want to get practical.
Okay.
What are some things that we can actually do on our job sites to take things to the next level?
Well, one of the best things you can do is just be proactive and do regular site inspections.
Okay.
And I don't mean just going through the motions with a checklist.
Right.
Really look around, try to see things from a fire safety perspective.
So what are we looking for? Give me some examples.
Well, the usual suspects.
Okay.
Flammable stuff stored improperly, fire exits blocked, damaged equipment,
Right.
electrical cords that are frayed, circuits that are overloaded,
Yeah.
anything that could start a fire, basically.
Well, I think this is a great opportunity to get your employees involved.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
More eyes on the ground.
Yeah.
Encourage people to speak up if they see something that's not right.
Yeah, that's so important.
Create that culture where people feel comfortable reporting hazards
Yeah.
without being afraid of getting in trouble.
Right. Absolutely.
Because we're all in this together.
Okay, so even if we do everything right, sometimes accidents still happen.
Yep. That's the reality.
So what about when a fire does break out? How do we make sure everybody knows what to do?
Fire drills, fire drills, fire drills.
Okay, but fire drills on a construction site, those have got to be different than the ones we did in school.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So what are some things we need to think about?
Well, first of all, make sure everybody knows when the drill is going to be
Right.
and where they're supposed to go.
Okay.
Make sure your evacuation routes are clear, no obstacles in the way.
Especially on a construction site, stuff can move around all the time.
Exactly. Things change constantly,
Yeah.
so you got to stay on top of it.
And make sure everyone knows what to do.
Right.
So it's smooth and there's no confusion.
Exactly. That's the key.
No, I imagine it's not enough to just practice the same thing every time.
Nope. Got to mix it up.
Right.
What if the fire is blocking the main exit?
Right. You got to think about those scenarios.
Exactly. What if someone's injured and needs help getting out?
Hey, yeah.
You got to be prepared for anything.
So those drills help you work out those kinks.
Exactly.
Okay, and what about communication during those drills?
Oh, super important.
Right.
You got to test your alarm system, make sure everyone knows how to use it.
Okay.
Practice calling the fire department.
So it's a full-on exercise,
Should be.
not just, okay, everybody walk outside.
Nope. Got to be realistic.
Okay, now after the drill is over, what then?
Time for a debrief.
Oh, okay.
Talk about what went well, what could be better.
So you're always improving.
Exactly. Always learning.
Okay, so we've done our inspections, we've practiced our drills.
Right.
What else can we do to stay on top of fire safety?
Training.
Ongoing training.
Oh, yeah. It's not a one-time thing.
Okay.
You got to keep refreshing people's knowledge.
So what kind of things should be covered in those training sessions?
Well, it depends on your specific site and the hazards you're dealing with.
Right.
But generally, things like how to prevent fires in the first place,
Okay.
how to use fire extinguishers and other equipment,
Yeah.
evacuation procedures, communication protocols.
So giving everybody the tools they need to stay safe.
Exactly. Knowledge is power when it comes to fire safety.
And I'm sensing another theme here, documentation.
Oh, yeah. Documentation is
Yeah.
key.
That-
Keep records of all your training activities.
Okay.
Shows OSHA you're taking it seriously.
Right. And it helps you track your progress too.
Absolutely. You can see where you need to improve.
Okay. Well, this has been awesome.
Good. I'm glad you think so.
We've covered so much about fire protection.
It's a big topic.
It is, but I think the main takeaway is that it's everybody's responsibility.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
We all got to work together to stay safe.
Exactly.
It's not just on the safety manager, it's on every single person on that job site.
So communicate, be proactive, and look out for each other.
Couldn't said it better myself.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into OSHA's fire protection requirements, presented by Safety One Source.
Thanks for joining us.
We hope you learned something new and that you'll put that knowledge into practice to make your workplaces safer.
Stay safe out there, everybody.